Hello and welcome to the Vintage Bubble Romper pattern tutorial. If you haven't already, you can download this pattern from my Etsy shop that's linked down below. I really recommend becoming familiar with the terms that I use for this pattern, as there are a lot of different fabrics and pieces and it can get a bit confusing. After cutting all of your pieces, you'll begin with the preparation page of the pattern, and this includes prepping the sleeves, ties, straps, and placket. I am adding some interfacing to my placket as this is a bit thinner of a fabric than I normally use, but I just love it, so I added that interfacing to stabilize it a bit. I'm starting with this seam on the straight edge of the sleeves, right sides together, and then after folding my ties hot dog style, I'm running a stitch first along the short edge, then with my needle down I'm picking up my presser foot to turn at the corner, and then continuing down the long raw edge, not the folded edge. I folded my placket right sides together and I'm stitching those short edges, and then onto the straps, which are right sides together, run a continuous seam along the perimeter except for the top, of course, so you can turn it, and just lift your presser foot at all of the corners. Now we're going to turn everything right side out and give everything a good press. A little tip that's helpful is placing a piece of twine inside your straps and ties, and make sure to catch them in the seam to make it easier to turn. And then once you turn them, you can cut the twine out. I'm going to pleat my sleeves, and you'll do this along the edge that's still raw, that curved edge there along the sleeve. And I start by folding them in half to find the center, and then taking a bit of fabric in my right hand, I push it under the fabric in my left hand, making a pleat. You can take some liberties here, but I personally like 4 evenly spaced pleats. Here at this slowed down version, you can take a really good look at what I'm doing. I push all my pleats inward towards the center one, but again, you can play with this and see what you like. They should curve really nicely, laying flat like this, and you can baste the edge to keep everything in place for when we insert them in the top. Here I'm adding my snaps to my placket. I personally use leather snaps because I love the way they look with the finished piece, but I will admit there are some drawbacks to them. They are for leather, so if you aren't using a heavy-duty fabric, they can tend to rip the fabric after extended wear. They also aren't the most secure, so for example, when my babies would slide off the couch, the tension on the piece would cause the buttons to unsnap. But like I said, I like the look and feel of them, so that's what I choose. The normal baby onesie snaps are a lot more secure, they just aren't as pretty. So choose whichever ones you like and install them. I mark everything first so it's all even, and then I install them off camera because I find doing it on concrete is a bit more stable than the table. And here are all the male snaps installed, and I'm just testing to make sure that they have a good fit with the female pieces. Now we're going to move on to constructing the top. Start by laying your top front down and place the straps at the shoulders. Then with the right sides together, align the top back shoulders with the top front, pin and place a seam at both the shoulders, and you'll repeat this with the lining top, just without the straps. Then we're going to insert the sleeves, but I'll slow it down so you can get a really good look at what's going on. With the main top laying on your workspace, match up the curved edge of the sleeve to the curved armhole. Make sure your fabrics are right sides together, so here I'm making sure my blue roses on the sleeve are touching the blue roses on the top, and I'm pinning it in place. And then we're going to lay the right side of the lining down onto the lining side of the sleeve and make sure all of our edges are lined up. Basically here you just want to make sure that your fabrics are matched up correctly. So your main fabric will touch the main fabric of the sleeve, and the lining fabric will touch the lining fabric of the top. We are going to run a seam along this curved edge, and make sure you're just starting at the armhole and stitching along the curve. We won't be stitching that straight edge just yet. Here I'm checking to make sure that I've caught everything in my seam. You'll want to sew this pattern with just a 1/4 inch seam allowance like the pattern says, otherwise things can get really bulky. But with that small seam allowance, it's easy to sometimes miss an edge or something, which I've done here on the other side. It's not a big deal though, we'll just take it back to the machine and run another seam. The beauty of lining this entire piece is that it hides a lot of mistakes and it doesn't have to be perfect to look amazing at the end. Here is that uncaught edge, so I'll just run it back through, checking exactly where it is and making sure to catch it this time. And then you can snip off the edges of these sleeves in here to keep everything nice and flat when it's turned. Now we're going to place the ties, so make sure that you have the seam on the tie pointing down, the raw edge of the tie pointing outside of the top, and then the rest of the tie place inside the top. And you can see where I folded it right there. And then make sure that when you place the ties, they are even on both sides of the back pieces. Then we'll just make sure that the main top edges are all lined up with a lining and pin everything in place. We'll then run a continuous seam starting at the bottom of the longest straight edge of the back piece, going up to catch the tie and then turning for the neckline, turning at the other side of the back and then finishing off at the bottom. Now we're going to turn the entire piece. This can be a bit tedious, so just go slow and use the sleeves to help you coax out the rest of the fabric. And after all is turned, take some time to press everything nicely, and you've almost got a completed top. This step I've found is the trickiest part of the pattern for people, so just take it slow, use the visuals in the pattern and in this video, and watch it a few times through to get it down. We want to finish this side seam, but we can't just place the right sides of the main fabric together or else the lining will have a raw edge inside. So instead, we need to open up the lining and the main fabric, and then flip it over onto the other side. So the main fabric on the front touches the main fabric on the back. The lining fabric on the front will then also touch the lining on the back piece, and then we can run a seam along the straight edge here. And here is that seam. This is what it'll look like on the right side, all lined up and pretty. And press these side seams, and then we'll move on to the ruffle. I've pleated this ruffle basically in the same way that I've done the sleeves, and I have it laying over the top just to make sure that it's long enough to run from side seam to side seam. You can change up this ruffle to really anything. You can make it longer to add more pleats. You can use a ruffler foot to give it kind of a fluffier texture than the flat pleats that I've done here, or you can use a lace or ruffle trim. The possibilities are really endless, and you can make some really unique pieces by personalizing this part of the pattern. I've run a seam along the very edge of the ruffle and the top just to attach the two. This isn't a load-bearing seam, if you will. It's just attaching the ruffle to make it easier when we go to attach the bottoms to the top. Speaking of bottoms, let's move on to those. You'll start by connecting all of the main pieces together at the back and side seams, and then you'll repeat that with the lining. Once you've completed that, we're going to flip the bottoms lining right side out, leaving the main bottoms wrong side out. And then we're going to place the lining inside of the main bottoms, and I find that matching up the side and back seams at the top and the bottom helps to keep everything straight while we work on the bottom of the bottoms. Here I am lining up all of the side and back seams at the bottom and then inserting the placket. The trick to get this right is just to make sure that the middle snap is touching the back seam of the main fabric's right side, with the raw edge sticking out. The pattern also has really helpful visuals for this. So after pinning it in place, we'll run a continuous seam along the bottom of the bottoms. I usually start at the placket just to make sure that it doesn't shift while I move the project through the machine. Let's flip it all right side out and give everything a good press. Now let's move on to the elastic. What we're doing here is placing a channel for the elastic. We will start by placing a safety pin in one end of the elastic and then place the edge without a safety pin in the corner of one of the leg holes. You'll want to visualize which way you'll need to run the project through the machine and start the elastic where it's easiest to place the project into the machine. You'll see what I mean here in a minute if you just watch how I place the bottoms into my machine. Once you get the elastic sandwiched in between the main fabric and the lining, butt it up as close to the edge as possible and pin it in place. We're then going to start the seam on the edge of this elastic, perpendicular to the leg hole, to make sure that the elastic is caught in place. And once you come off of the edge of the elastic, with your needle down, lift the presser foot to turn and start the long channel seam, using your presser foot to leave room between the stitches and the elastic. You want to make sure that you don't catch the elastic in this seam or you won't be able to pull it through. You'll stop the seam about 1/2 inch away from the edge of the other end of the leg hole so that you can pull the safety pin through it. Here's a closer look. I'm placing the side of the elastic without the safety pin into the corner of the leg hole. Then I'm pinning it in place, butt it up as close to the edge as possible. Then I'll start the seam by catching the edge of the elastic in the corner, turn, and then create the channel, stopping with enough room to pull the safety pin through. Then, after pulling the safety pin through, make sure to grab the edge of the elastic and stitch it in place, again perpendicular to the channel seam. The pattern has really helpful visuals for this, so be sure to check that out. With the leg holes completed, we will add the female snaps to the front of the bottoms. And again, I did it off camera, but I'm making sure to line them up and that they have a good fit after they're installed. And here are your bottoms. All that's left to do is fold in the tops and give them a good press to make them easier to attach to the top and give them a nice clean edge. Attaching the bottoms to the top is the most time-consuming and tedious part of the pattern. Just go slow and triple check that everything is laying nice and flat and even. Start by lining up the side seams and sandwich the top in between the bottom main fabric and lining fabric. If you're using a lighter fabric for the bottoms, you might need to ease it a bit to get a really nice clean finish. There are notches on the back bottom pieces to aid in making a pleat, and this pleat adds the bubble to the bubble romper. The easiest way to do it is to start at the side seam, making sure that everything is laying flat until you reach the middle of one of the back pieces. Then do the same thing from the edge of that same back piece until you have all of the extra fabric there in the middle. Fold the extra fabric in towards the middle back and pin it in place. Repeat with the lining on that same side that you just did, and then repeat on the other side of the back. Then we are going to very slowly, to make sure that we don't catch any other part of the project, run a continuous stitch around the circumference of the romper. Stop every little bit to make sure that the lining is still in place, and you can do this by lifting up the romper to peek underneath and see where the lining is on your sewing machine plate. Here's how it'll look. It likely won't be perfect, but that's okay. It allows for the entire romper to be lined, which I think adds such a nice feel to the entire piece and makes it look really luxurious. Of course, you can always do this step by hand if you are an absolute perfectionist. Then pin the straps in place and add your buttons. And here is your completed bubble romper. I really hope that you enjoyed this pattern. A lot of love went into drafting it and making sure that it was just right for you guys. If you have any questions, please email me. My email is down below. I would love to answer any questions that you have. And I'd also love to see your completed projects, especially because these can be so personalized and so unique. I can't wait to see what you make with them. And this is what my daughter thinks about you finishing this project.